An individual who chooses to be ethical will suffer cognitive dissonance, just like people who choose to be unethical. There is cognitive dissonance. They will have an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other shoulder, even if you're ethical. They may justify losing what they would have gained by their unethical behavior by convincing themselves that the unethical behavior is worse than their loss. I've been in situations where I had to be ethical a lot. I was working in the laboratory. I discovered a guy who had sickle cell anemia trait. Sickle cell anemia trait isn't bad, but it made him anemic for one thing. And the other problem was that if he started pulling G's, then potentially he might have gone into crisis. And of course he would have crashed the plane and killed himself. Whoever else was underneath the plane at the time. That was the dilemma. But he had always wanted to be a pilot, and he offered me a month's worth of his flight pay, and if I would lie. You know, it's what am I on? I mean, this guy's going to kill himself. It's not that big a deal as far as I'm concerned. Why not take the money? And the money was pretty good. It was like $200. He was offering me the same amount of money that I would have made in a month. So I had a choice to make. Actually, I didn't have a choice to make. I thought it was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard. This man's got anemia and he wants to fly airplanes. Which is okay. I mean, he can want to fly airplanes all day long, but if you're anemic, you shouldn't be in an airplane. Or you shouldn't be pulling G's anyway. Anyway, that's what I told him. And he called me all kinds of stupid and all kinds of an asshole. He said, "What's wrong with you? Why don't you just take the money? Just take the money. Just take the money." Kept saying, "Just take the money." Anyway, I didn't do it anyway. It didn't really cause me that much cognitive dissonance because that was my job. I was only making, I don't know, $250 a month or whatever. It was a long time ago, during Vietnam, so we weren't being paid very well. But I really didn't have any problem with it. But a lot of people do. Some people are ethical to the point that it's silly, and they don't need to be ethical anymore. You know, my brother, who always drives the speed limit, no matter where he is, no matter what's going on. He always drives the speed limit. Does he need to do that? Well, hell no, he doesn't need to do that. You certainly don't need to drive the speed limit on the reservation because nobody does, except him, if he ever were here. He's up in Indiana. So don't worry, he won't be clogging up your highways anytime soon. After rejecting the unethical behavior, they will be more adamant about remaining ethical, of course, and this is the ethical person. And maybe that's what I'm doing. Maybe it was harder for me than I remember, rejecting that payment to lie about that guy's anemia. He never flew, by the way. He never did. And he came in and he told me about it about 3 times. And he invited me outside. Of course, he was an officer. I was enlisted. Officers and enlisted people can't fight. But he wanted to fight me. That silly guy. I thought that was kind of silly. He would have lost his commission. Recovering addicts very often become adamant critics of the substances that they use to abuse because of these types of dissonant justifications. That's one of the reasons why AA in just about any place, those people are really serious about staying sober. And if you want, I've never been a drunk, so I don't really talk about it that adamantly. But boy, these guys will just scream and pound the table because they're so serious about being a recovering addict. Judson Mills in 1958 did research on 6th graders and gave them the chance to cheat. The ones who cheated became more lenient toward cheating because they were trying to rationalize it in their own head, the cognitive dissonance, of course. The ones who didn't cheat adopted a harsher attitude toward cheating. And that's, of course, because that's what they did. And they were trying to justify their own behavior. Everybody tries to justify their behavior. According to Westen in 2006, people twirl the cognitive kaleidoscope until the pieces fall into the pattern that they want to see. Then the brain repays them by activating circuits involved in pleasure, not unlike that what addicts feel when they get a fix. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make ourselves feel better. People that smoke pot try to rationalize their behavior. They try to justify their behavior. Those of us who are very much against smoking marijuana, we are just as adamant in the other direction. We have twirled the kaleidoscope, and now we feel good about our position. And of course, the stronger your position, the better you feel when you argue one way or the other. We can find dissonance operating in almost every part of the world, but it does not always take the same form, and the content of the cognitions that produce it may differ across cultures. We live in an individualistic society, so our cognitive dissonance is different than it would be in a collectivist society. In a collectivist society, it is the group that is the most important, not the individual. And for that reason, their idea of justification of cognitive dissonance is completely different from ours. Once upon a time, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. It was a sneak attack. Well, that's what we call a sneak attack. They never did. They still don't to this day. I lived in Japan for about 6 months, and I never heard the Japanese refer to Pearl Harbor at all, for one thing. But they were quite proud that they were able to attack us, and we didn't have a clue that it was going to happen. And maybe it's because they're a collectivist society and we are an individualistic society. As far as we were concerned, it was a sneak attack. My dad, till his dying day, hated the Japanese, would not eat, wouldn't eat Chinese food, which doesn't make any sense at all. But he wouldn't buy a Japanese car, wouldn't buy anything that was Japanese, made in Japan. And that's because he hated the Japanese because of the sneak attack on Pearl Harbor. But the reality is they thought it was a brilliant strategic move. And if you understand the Japanese culture, you understand that it's kind of a paranoid culture in that you are always prepared for attack. And if somebody attacks you and you're not prepared for it, it's not their fault that they attacked you, it's your fault because you weren't prepared. I know, that sounds a little weird, but it's just the way that their culture works. They tried to do this all through World War II. When we first started fighting the Japanese, they fooled us over and over and over and over again because we had no idea what they were going to do next. We couldn't predict what was going to happen next. And of course, that's the major aspect of being in the military is being prepared for what's going to happen next. And of course, the Japanese fooled us time and time again. And then finally, about the end of 1942, we figured them out. We started thinking differently. But we have to do these kinds of things. We have to be able to do this. When we started fighting in Iraq, the war lasted. Actually, it took like 6 months before we had taken over almost the entire country. But the war is still going on. What the hell's going on? Why weren't we able to slow that thing down? Why weren't we able to control the population? And the answer is because we didn't understand their religion. So you have to understand your enemy. You have to understand the other guys. And usually we don't have to worry about it. Right now we're kind of in a trade war with the Chinese. And if we don't understand what they're thinking, then we're going to lose. We have been losing. We keep borrowing money from the Japanese and the Chinese. And we owe them trillions of dollars. They've got all of our debt, unfortunately. So we're going to have to figure this thing out. Otherwise, we're going to get stung again, just like we got stung in the 1980s and 1990s by the Japanese. They started buying up our entire country. They bought up Times Square. They bought up buildings all over the United States. They bought up almost the entire island of Hawaii because we allowed them to control our economy. We'll go into that. Anyway, so collectivist societies And individualistic societies have different ways of looking at things. In Japan, many people will vicariously experience dissonance on the part of someone that they know and they like. So if you've got a good buddy and they're feeling bad, then you will have the same cognitive dissonance that they will. You will feel the same things that they will. Now you can call that empathy if you want, but it's not really empathy. It's you feeling exactly the same way that they feel. Remember, it's a collectivist society. So you have a good day, somebody else has a bad day. If you're from the United States, you have a good day, they have a bad day, you're still having a good day. You wish that they were having a good day, but you don't feel the same thing that they feel. But in Japan, of course, you feel the same thing that your friends feel. And this is one of the reasons why in collectivist societies, they don't have a lot of friends. And the reason they don't have a lot of friends is because when you are somebody's friend, you have to feel the same way that they do. You have to be the same way that they are. If they have a financial problem, you have to give them money. So people don't have a lot of friends. If you have a lot of friends, it means you're poor. They think because you lend out so much money. I know, it's kind of strange. The observer's attitude will change to conform to that of their friends. So when you're hanging out with your friends and they're sad because their boyfriend just broke up with them, then you're sad because their boyfriend just broke up with them. So you feel the same pain that they feel, as strange as that is. When the behavior is being observed, empathy is reduced, but returns after the observation is over. And this is the very opposite of the way Americans feel. When we're with somebody, we feel exactly the same way that they do. But when we're away from them, we don't feel that same way. But in Japan, in Asia, you feel the same way. So if they're depressed, you're depressed. And you stay depressed. But in the United States, of course, we don't do that. We're individualistic, so we have our own feelings, as weird as that is. Now this gets really strange if you're overseas. This was one of the problems that we had with military personnel in Japan. Japanese women might want to talk to somebody, but they would misinterpret what the woman was doing. They thought she was flirting with them, and the reality was that she was just acting the same way that they did, because that's the way they do things. So if they're with you and you're happy, then they're happy. And if you're flirty, then they act the same way you do. They're kind of flirty. But it doesn't mean that they really want to go any farther than just flirtation. And probably they don't even recognize it as flirtation. They recognize it as mirroring your behavior, as strange as that may seem. So this got really tough with American guys, with especially the young GIs going over to Japan. We still have bases in Japan. We have naval bases and we have Air Force bases, but we don't have Marine bases because the Marines just couldn't figure it out, and they kept thinking that the woman was coming on to them, and then they would try something, and of course they would be accused of trying to sexually molest the individual. So we were having lots and lots of trouble. I was over there in 94, 95, and while I was there, I mean, it was case after case after case. I was on an Air Force base way up north, so it wasn't so bad up north, of course, and they were Air Force personnel, a little bit more astute than the Marines were. The Marines were down by Tokyo, and of course, it's a little bit more open society. So they were having a lot more trouble than the Air Force personnel. In the United States, immigrant parents and their young adult children often clash over cultural values. The children want to be like their American peers. The parents want them to adhere to their ancestral culture. The dissonance of the children is quite profound, because the parents want them to act like they did in the old country, and the kids, of course, want to act like everybody around them. Now I was thinking about this morning. I was thinking about people on the reservation. I was thinking about teenagers on the reservation. One of the things about teenagers is they tend to be rebellious, and there's a reason why they are rebellious. It is necessary for them to rebel against their parents. It's necessary for them to rebel against their culture. And the reason they do that is because they have to become autonomous. This is true in collectivist societies, this is true in individualistic societies. So all high school kids are fairly rebellious, and this is a tough one. This is a really tough situation. So high school kids, you're going to find high school kids that do things that are relatively non-traditional here on the reservation. They're going to wear skulls and all kinds of things. I mean, these are things that traditionally you shouldn't be doing, right? Wearing a picture of a skull on your shirt. Uh-oh, there you go. Oh my God, you're so rebellious. You're trying to think of what you had on today.
I was like, wait a minute.
Wait a minute, this is mean. Oh my God. Yeah. So they're doing things that are rebellious. Now, as you get older, how old are you? 21? 22. See, you're almost an adult. Oh man, you got 3 more years and then your brain's going to be completely mature. At that point, this whole concept of rebellion, this need to rebel against society is just going to go away. It's going to dissipate. You're going to start acting like everybody else. The adults, I know you don't. Especially now. Right now you're thinking there's nothing worse than acting like everybody else. But the reality is, as a high school kid, you acted like everybody else so that you could be accepted by all of your peers in your high school. Were they acting like traditional rebels?
I mean, everybody else was.
Everybody else was acting traditional?
Kind of the weird one in school.
You were the weird one. You're the black sheep of the reservation. You are the black sheep. Okay. It's going to go away. It's going to change. And everything will make more sense when you're 25 years old. I promise. Okay. But this is happening to these guys at the same time. Teenagers, adolescents they're all rebellious to some extent. Sometimes, and it really all depends on the area that they're living in as to what they're rebelling against. Sometimes they're rebelling against the rebellion. They're rebelling against the kids that are acting non-traditional. I mean, it really all depends on the situation and who you're around as to who you're rebelling against. So this need to rebel is very real and very common. In a longitudinal study of Vietnamese and Cambodian adolescents in the United States, those suffering the most cognitive dissonance were the most likely to get into trouble, did less well in school. They fought more with their parents than the individuals who were less rebellious. So who were the ones that were less rebellious? Well, the question is, who did they identify with? If they identified with the American culture, if everybody around them identified with the American culture, then the rebellious ones were the ones that tried to go back to a more traditional mindset. And of course, the difference between Vietnam, Cambodia, and the United States is vast, is quite different. So they may have become thugs. They may have become part of Vietnamese and Cambodian gangs, and this is very common in the Los Angeles area. The interesting thing is that after the Vietnam War, a lot of Vietnamese and Cambodians came to the United States because the communists were taking over, and if they had any kind of money at all, they came to the United States. Or if they had been backing the United States moved them they moved them over here. Well, they wanted to live someplace that was more like where they were from. So a lot of them moved to Houston, a lot of them moved to Los Angeles, San Diego area. So there's a large Vietnamese Cambodian population in Southern California and in around Houston and in Louisiana and southern Mississippi, as interesting as that is. But as you can see, they're all wearing black, and they have tats. This guy's got tats all the way up his neck, as interesting as that is. So we all need tattoos. I just decided. When we put a great deal of effort into a project and then the project does not appear to have been worthwhile, We can justify our efforts through a process called justification of effort, interpreting the ambiguous as positive. So let's say that we decide that we're going to open a grocery store on the reservation, and we're only going to sell healthy foods. What a great idea. The problem is, who's going to come and buy that food? One person. I've got one person that's going to come and buy the food. So I bring in produce. The problem with produce is bananas. Let's say bananas. I bring in bananas, and they're nice yellow, ripe bananas, perfect bananas, and I've got 100 of them. How many of them am I going to sell before one? I'm going to sell it to you. And there we go. So when you buy one bunch, which is maybe 5, that means I've got 95 bananas that are going to go bad. What do I do with 95 bad bananas? What a great idea. But I've just eaten all my profits right there by losing all my bananas. I bring in cauliflower. Does anybody like cauliflower? You got one? Just one? Oh, two? Cauliflower? No. Okay, so I bring in 10 heads of cauliflower, and you guys buy 2 apiece. Now I've got 6 cauliflower that are going to go bad. So the idea was there, and the idea is not a bad one. I mean, we'll bring in fresh produce because people complain that the produce at Bash's isn't any good. And I agree, I don't like their produce either. But the problem is, who's going to buy it? And who can afford it is the other problem. How do I decide what I'm going to charge people for my food? How am I going to decide? How do I decide? How do I know what to charge? I'll just charge 10 cents a head for my cauliflower. Wait a minute, I just had to pay $2.50 a head. So it all depends on how much I have to pay the people from California. And what if they're coming in from New Zealand? I eat Granny Smith apples. Well, the Granny Smith apples grown in the United States, they're harvested in November. So what's going on? Where am I going to get my Granny Smith apples? Well, I have to get them from New Zealand. And of course, New Zealand is like half a world away, so I have to pay transportation costs. Anyway, it's justification of effort. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to justify what's going on. So I may talk about all the positive things about opening up a new store and trying to sell you cauliflower, but you hate cauliflower. Or you know you may not hate it, but you don't eat it. You're not gonna buy my cauliflower, damn it. So what am I gonna do? But I have to justify me opening that store, so I'm going to talk about how positive it was to potentially open that store. The more effort, the stronger the justification. So the more money I put into it, the more I will try to justify what I've done. And this is known as justification of effort. I opened a store, I built the damn thing with my own bare hands, and I brought in all that wonderful produce, and nobody bought it. And so now I have to justify it. So probably I'm going to blame you guys. I'm not going to blame me. It's not my fault you wouldn't eat my bananas. I bought all those kiwis, and you guys wouldn't eat them. So whose fault is that? Must be yours. Couldn't possibly be mine. It's probably a stupid idea to bring in kiwis anyway. Does anybody eat kiwis? They taste like gooseberries. Have you ever eaten gooseberries?
No.
They taste like kiwis. They're exactly the same color. But they're tiny, they're berries. Justifications can be internal, changing something about themselves to reduce the dissonance, or external. The reason for the dissonance is outside the person and involves an external result, such as a reward or avoiding punishment. And usually, of course, the extrinsic ones are the ones that we justify the most, not the internal ones. It was my fault because what was happening over the weekend? The guy that murdered his wife. There was a guy that murdered his wife and his 2 daughters. And he was a doctor. And he finally admitted why he did it. He got mad at his wife and he couldn't control himself, so he killed her. Then when he killed his wife, he realized that he didn't have anybody to take care of his kids. So he took his 2 daughters out and killed them. Stupid as, and his wife was pregnant. So this is in Colorado. So he's in jail for murdering, he has 5 life sentences for all 5 of the people that he murdered. No, 4 people, 4 life sentences, because he murdered 4 people. His 2 daughters, his wife, and his unborn child. But once he murdered, he lost his temper and he killed his wife. And he realized he didn't have anybody to take care of his kids. So he killed his kids. As stupid as that sounds. And of course he claimed that somebody came and murdered her. It wasn't him, it was somebody else. Often in order to be polite in society, we have to develop an opinion or attitude that runs counter to our own beliefs and attitudes. And this is known as counterattitudinal advocacy. We're seeing that in the United States. This is the reason Donald Trump was elected president. There were a lot of people that were really upset that Barack Obama was elected president. They didn't like, for one thing, they didn't like black people. But another thing, they didn't like his politics. So when Donald Trump started preaching, what's this political correctness thing we've got going on? There was a lot of people that went, yeah, I agree with you, so I'm voting Trump. Because I feel exactly the same way. If you remember the white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, he didn't condemn it. He didn't say this is the wrong thing to do. So there were a lot of people in the United States who, despite the fact that the president was black, despite the fact that the government was relatively liberal, they didn't like it. And so they either had to maintain counterattitudinal advocacy, they either had to accept it, or they had to wait. And actually that's exactly what they did. They waited until the next election, and they voted in the person that was the least like Barack Obama they could possibly find. As a matter of fact, he said some really negative things about Barack Obama. Tons of them. He's tried to do away with everything that Obama did. So it was really kind of interesting. These people were out there, and they were waiting until the next election. And they elected the other guy. They elected the very opposite of what they had before. When we do this with little external justifications, we may begin believing the lie that we are told. And of course, it all depends on whether you watch Fox News or you watch MSNBC or CNN as to what type of information that you're getting. Either one side or the other side is lying. Has to be, because one side says one thing, the other side says the other thing. So somebody has to be lying. So somebody is justifying, it's an external justification of the lies that they're hearing, but somebody has to be believing the lie. It has to be that way, because they're believing two completely opposite things. It's 180 degrees from one another. So one person is lying. The question is, which side is lying? Okay. That's the question. And it really doesn't matter which way you go. This is a democracy, so you're able to believe anything that you want. People that watch Fox News don't watch any other news. People that watch CNN don't watch any other news. So they're only getting one side. And of course, you think that your side is right. And that's okay, because that's the way it works. Festinger and Carl Smith in 1959 discovered that when you offer someone a large external reward to go against their beliefs, they justify the change with the larger reward, and they don't change their beliefs. So if I said I'll give you $1 million to shave your head and wear yellow robes and dance around and say Hare Krishna, would you do it? And for $1 million? Hell yes, you would. You're good to go. But that doesn't mean you're going to believe in Hare Krishna. And of course I'd give you a different thing to say every week, and of course you'd be speaking in Hindi, I don't know, maybe, and you'd be writing in Sanskrit. But that's okay. For $1 million, you'll do just about, well, maybe not just about anything. But you do it. You do it, despite the fact that we haven't changed your idea about anything. Because I've given you $1 million. And you're justifying it within yourself by going, well, it's $1 million. I'll do just about anything for $1 million. including shave my head and dance around in the yellow robe. But when a small external reward is offered, the individual's beliefs are more likely to change. Okay, so you got a little kid, and the little kid wants a toy, and you tell the little kid, if you're good, which the kid doesn't want to be good, the kid wants to be bad. If you're good, I'll give you a toy. Well, that's a huge thing for a kid. You need to change that child's behavior. Now, how in the world are you going to change its behavior? If you keep giving them a reward for being good, then they're going to expect a reward for being good every time. But you need to change their behavior. You need to make them good. You need to make them want to be good. So you can't give them a big reward every time. You can't give them that damn toy every time. It's got to be something else. It's got to be something smaller. And if it's smaller, the only way that they can justify it in their own mind is to actually change their beliefs. I'm being good because I want to be good. Oh, that's it, I want to be good. But if you give them if you tell somebody I'll give you $10,000 if you don't smoke until you're 21 years old. I'll give you $100,000 if you don't smoke until you're 21 years old. They're not going to smoke until they're 21 years old. But guess what's going to happen after they're 21 years old? They'll start smoking. They haven't changed their minds. They haven't changed their belief system. So what you need to do is make them change their belief system. Give them a pat on the back. Oh, you're a good boy because you don't smoke. You're a good person because you're not strung out on crystal meth all the time. Or what? Give them a pat on the back. You give them money, and when it's time, they'll just start using. That's what they'll do. So what you have to do is you have to change the way that they think. You have to change their beliefs. And you do that with small rewards. If you give them a large reward, then that becomes the reason why they're doing things. If you pay people for good grades, they'll make good grades just for the money. But they won't like it, they won't study hard, they won't like the subject material. They'll just be doing it for the money. Remember the $1 million I gave you for shaving your head and dancing around in a yellow robe? Okay, exactly. So they have to justify it in their own minds. And if you give them a big reward, it's easy to justify. I'm doing it for the money. But if it's a small reward, they have to change their belief system. They actually have to change their belief system in order to keep doing it. Anyway. The Festinger and Carl Smith experiment has been replicated many times using a myriad of beliefs, but always with the same results. Small rewards will get you to change the way you think. Large rewards, they will do it because of the money. They're doing it for the money. The smaller the incentive, the greater the softening of the attitude. Since there is little external justification, the justification has to be internal. So if I'm trying to get somebody to join the NRA, I will give them a bumper sticker. I will give them a sticker that they can put in the back of their window. Small reward. And this is the way that I get them to believe in the Second Amendment. If they don't believe in the Second Amendment, I can't. If I give them a large reward, if I give them $100 to change their ideas, then they're not going to change their belief system. It's going to stay the same. NRA was a bad example. Sorry. Harsh punishment tends to teach us to try to avoid getting caught. When a child is refraining from doing something he wants to do, and while he does have some justification for not doing it, he lacks complete justification. In this situation, he continues to experience dissonance. He wants to be a bad person. He wants to laugh just like everybody else and act up in class. He wants to sit in the back of the room and be a troublemaker. That's what he wants to do, just like all those cool kids that sit in the back of the room and are troublemakers. Therefore, the individual must find another way to justify their actions, and of course, he's going to grab a hold of anything that he possibly can. Punishment works in a similar manner to rewards. When the punishment is small, the individual is required to justify their behavior internally, and it is more likely to change the way that they think. So we're trying to change your belief system. We're trying to change your behavior. How do we do that? Big punishment and bigger rewards don't work. This is one of the reasons why if you send somebody to jail, huge punishment, sending them to jail, taking them away from their peers for an extended length of time. Does that change the way that they believe? Is that going to keep them from being a criminal in the future? No, it's not, because it's a huge punishment. It doesn't work. We need small things. We need to change their belief system. That's what we need to do. So we need small punishments. The only way to justify your behavior is by self-persuasion. This is known as insufficient punishment when it doesn't really change the way that you act. And of course, we see this over and over again, especially with people with antisocial personality disorder. Individuals with antisocial personality disorder, punishment doesn't work on them. You can't hurt them. You can, even if you spank them, it's not going to work. It doesn't hurt them, because in their minds they already know exactly how things are supposed to be. How things are supposed to be. If you have antisocial personality disorder, it's like your brain is concrete. You know exactly what you want, and that's the only justification that you need. So you really can't change their behavior. And this is one of the difficulties of dealing with these individuals. People that are taking 241 abnormal psychology. This is a problem with people with antisocial personality disorder. You can't change their minds. They already know that what they think is correct. Everything they think is correct. And they know what they want, and there's nothing you can do. So there's no way that I can counsel somebody and change their behavior pattern, because these people already know exactly what's going to happen next. Antisocial personality disorder. Aronson and Carl Smith, and Aronson is one of the authors of your textbook. Actually, it's the first author of your textbook. In 1963, Aronson and Carl Smith wanted to follow up on severe and mild punishment paradigms. They threatened severe and mild punishment for children who played with a select toy. They discovered that the same cognitive process in action with the children and the toys. The ones that they told they were going to punish just a little bit justified not playing with the toy by thinking that they didn't want to play with the toy. And the ones that they offered a huge punishment to, they still wanted to play with the toy. And of course they didn't internalize it. The children who had received a severe threat continued to rate the forbidden toy as highly desirable or more desirable than they had before the threat. The children in the mild threat condition needed internal justification to reduce their dissonance. They convinced themselves the reason that they had not played with the toy was that they did not really like it. They rated the forbidden toy as less attractive than they had when the experiment began. So the worst thing you can do for your child is to threaten them with severe punishment, because it's going to make them want that more. Oh, wait a minute. Now, usually if you're one of those parents that pays a lot of attention to your child, you really don't need to threaten them. If you're one of those parents that is only around your child every once in a while, you're a workaholic, so you're always working on something, and you're only around your child a very little amount of time, then you really don't have a lot of time to correct them. And these are the parents that usually threaten their children with severe punishment. And these are the ones who are driving their child to bad behavior. Because they can't justify it internally, they have to justify it externally, as confusing as that may be. So, let me give you a quick example. Let's say that we've got a rich person, and the rich person, the only way that they can stay rich is to work a lot. They work 18 hours a day. Here they go. They work 18 hours a day, and they don't spend a lot of time with their children. So when they are with their children, the only way they can control them is by either offering them huge rewards if you do what I tell you to do, I'll give you $100. Or by threatening them, if you do that again, I'm going to send you to military school. Are you getting the picture? Okay, so this is a wealthy person, and they don't spend a whole lot of time with their kids. Now, how are those kids going to turn out? Whatever they want to do, they're going to go. They're going to continue to want to do it because they haven't internalized the need. They haven't internalized the justification for not doing it. So the more severe the punishment that you offer this child, the less likely that they're going to change their belief system. So if they want to smoke pot, you say, if you smoke pot, I'm going to take away all of your electronic toys, and you'll never, and you'll be punished for 6 months. It's going to make them want to smoke pot more. Then if you say, I'm really disappointed in you if you smoke pot, it's not really very good for you. Now they're going to want to do what you ask them to do, of course, but that'll force them to have internal justification, and it'll change their belief system. So the next time their friends go, come on dude, let's go blaze up, dude, they're going to go, no, that's so uncool. You're going to say, no, that's so uncool. But because you've internalized it now. Blaze up, exactly. You say that all the time, don't you? Let's blaze up. But it's what everybody says. I saw it on television.
When you say it's weird.
It was a movie. It was a movie from 1987, so I'm sure it's still. This is still stuff that they say. Okay. Blaze up. Put it in there. Okay, write it in your notes. If you want someone to do something or not to do something only once, the most effective strategy would be to promise a large reward or threaten a severe punishment. If it's just a one-time thing, you don't really have to worry about it. So you can threaten them with death if you want to. If you ever do that again, I'm going to kill you. You can do that, and probably will keep them from doing it. It's not going to change their mind, but it's only a one-time situation. But if you want someone to become committed to an attitude or behavior, the smaller the reward or punishment that will lead to a momentary compliance, the greater the eventual change will be, and therefore the more permanent. So if you're trying to change somebody's behavior forever, their belief system, if you're trying to change their belief system, don't offer them a big reward, because all you're doing is you're tainting whatever it is that you're trying to change. If you want somebody to go to church, wait a minute, let's see. If you want somebody to go to church, then you need to offer them small rewards. And that's one of the reasons why at Sunday school they give out little pieces of candy and crap like that. Isn't that what happens? Do they give you $10 to go to Sunday school? Hell no. No, if they gave you $100 to go to Sunday school, geez, I'd go. For the money, I can use $100. Larger rewards and severe punishments as strong external justifications encourage compliance but prevent real attitude change. And of course, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to change people's ideas. We're trying to change their belief system so they won't do it for an extended length of time. So, how in the world are we going to work on criminals? If we send them to prison, they just justify that almost justifies their behavior, and we're not going to change their idea about being a criminal. We had to do this in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, 92% of all the opium grown in the world comes out of Afghanistan. So that's the bad stuff. That's the illegal stuff. Most of the legal opiates and opioids come out of India. But all the illegal stuff comes out of Afghanistan. So there are large sections of Afghanistan, and that is their economy, is growing opium. Illegally, and then they'll warehouse it and then they'll sell it. So how in the world are we going to get these guys to stop doing this kind of stuff? It's their economy. We tried to get them to grow food instead of opium. Food's good, They were able to buy lots of food with the money they made off of the opium. So how in the world were we going to keep them from growing opium? This is a problem that we're still having. How are we going to control this? Well, my brother did it. My brother was over there, and he was in charge of a section of Afghanistan, and he did it by talking to the people that were in charge. And that was good. I mean, that worked. I mean, they warehoused all their opium, and they weren't selling anyhow. So it was okay. But he was only over there for a year. I think I told you this story. The guy that came in, next guy that came in was an evangelist. He was an evangelical Christian. All these guys were Muslim. And he tried to convert them to Christianity. Well, I don't know about how you guys feel about somebody trying to tell you that all of your ideas are wrong, but they didn't like it, so they sold all their opium. All that my brother had them warehousing this stuff. So it worked. My brother's idea worked with the whole idea of punishment. And of course he was talking about going to hell and all kinds of stuff. I mean, that's fairly severe. You're going to be okay for like, I don't know, the next 20, 30 years, but then you're going to live eternally in hell if you don't change your religion. People don't like to hear that kind of stuff. I don't know. Okay. Anyway, so let's talk about being a hypocrite. President Bill Clinton was about to be impeached by Congress for a sexual liaison he had with a White House intern. They rationalized it by saying he lied under oath, which he did. He lied under oath at a couple different points, but then he corrected it. That's okay. He still had sex with that intern. And we've got the whole story. You can read it if you want.
Depends on what you consider sexual contact.
Well, he ejaculated, and it was because he was having contact with that young lady.
They just showed a documentary on this. It was really funny. He was his language.
Yeah.
Because he's a lawyer.
Sure. Yeah.
And he was able to manipulate even words like the and is.
Exactly. Words are important to lawyers.
He was about to get impeached for that?
Yeah, he's about to be impeached.
He did get impeached.
That's right.
He did get impeached by one house.
But President Donald Trump doesn't get impeached for saying things like, "Oh, it's okay to grab a woman even if they don't want to." That's not impeachable.
That hasn't. Well, that may happen in the future. We're not going to. Let's not worry about Trump. Let's just talk about the hypocrites from this interaction. We won't get into current politics. This is 1990 politics. He was president from 92 through 2000. There was a lot of righteous indignation on the right. The conservative right was ready to. This guy got he had illicit sex, not genital sex either, but he had illicit sex with an intern. And by God, nobody should be having sex with somebody that's not their spouse. Do you understand how horrible that is? Adultery. It's against the UCMJ. Adultery. And the type of sex he had would be considered sodomy. My God. Anyway, so the right side was ready to burn this guy. I mean, they were ready to fry him. They were going to kick him out of office because he had had this strange, this unnatural sex with this young lady. So the Speaker of the House at the time was Newt Gingrich. This is Newt Gingrich right here. He was ready to start the whole thing, and then it was revealed that Newt Gingrich himself had divorced twice because he had been having affairs with other women, and he was still hot and heavy in an affair with a reporter. So not only was he not a loyal husband, but he also had committed adultery himself. Not just once, but twice. He lost 2 marriages because of adulterous behavior. And he was, right now, at that time he was married, and he was having an affair with another woman. And he'd been having this affair for years. So he wasn't the person to impeach the president. Okay, he was a hypocrite. He was going to impeach him for untoward behavior, yet he had participated in exactly the same behavior with other women himself. So they decided so Gingrich stepped down from his speakership, and they decided that Bob Livingston should be the new Speaker of the House, and he was ready to go with the impeachment proceedings. Turned out that he was having an affair, a long-standing affair with a woman that wasn't his wife. He was married to a woman, but he was having a long-standing affair with another woman. So he stepped down. So who in the world did the Republicans get to run the impeachment proceeding? Well, they found this guy from Illinois, and he'd been a wrestling coach, and they called him the wrestling coach. His name was Dennis Hastert, and Hastert was the one that led the impeachment proceedings. Hastert is in jail right now, and the reason he's in jail was because when he was a wrestling coach, he was having affairs with his wrestlers. He was molesting his wrestlers. I know. So what we're dealing with here is hypocrisy. They were indignant because Bill Clinton had this untoward sex with a White House intern, yet everybody that came up to be the Speaker of the House to run the proceedings were doing exactly the same thing that he had done. So how in the world could they possibly, how could they possibly run the proceedings? And I find Hastert's behavior worse. Not because it was gay, it was homosexual behavior, but because he was paying the people off in order to do it. And he was committing bank fraud in order to pay all these people off and not say anything about these affairs he was having with his own wrestlers. He is in jail right now. Dennis Hastert is in jail right now. Bob Livingston has died. Newt Gingrich is on television all the time talking about how wonderful Donald Trump is, despite the fact he grabs women in places he shouldn't be touching them. Anyway, hypocrisy, and that's what hypocrisy is somebody saying that something shouldn't happen, and then they're doing it themselves, condemning other individuals for this behavior. And that, of course, happened in Congress. So the question is, could the Democrats possibly find somebody to impeach Donald Trump, is the question, who hadn't done similar things themselves? I don't know, but we'll find out. Or maybe we won't. Maybe impeachment proceedings will never come up. Hypocrisy is where an individual states a position to the point of preaching and then does the opposite practice. Do as I say and not as I do, but a great deal more extreme. That is what hypocrisy is. So if I tell you that you should be studying every night, not watching television every night, the first thing I do is turn on the damn television. So how in the world can I tell you not to watch television? That would be hypocritical on my part. I'm trying to think of something else. Or to eat healthy, and then I drink my Mountain Dew and eat my double-stuffed Oreo cookies. What a hypocrite I would be if I told you not to eat that stuff. This is Ted Haggard. Ted, I love evangelists, aren't they wonderful? Actually, I had an aunt who was an evangelist, okay? And she used to come to our house and tell us we were all going to hell, which is always a lot of fun to have your aunt tell you where you're headed. At least she knew where we were going. Anyway, my aunt was probably the biggest thief you could possibly imagine. If you dropped a $20 bill on the floor, and she would pick it up and put it in her pocket. As far as she was concerned, it wasn't your money. God had dropped it out of your pocket so that she could pick it up. This is how she rationalized stuff. My family, during the Great Depression, lived off of the money that she made preaching to people. She was taking their last nickel and dime, telling them that if she prayed for them, they would go to heaven. Or at least they wouldn't go to hell. And then my family was living off that money, the last nickel and dime some people had. She was using their belief system so that my family could eat. That my dad was working in a grocery store, and he got all the old food, so that was kind of a good deal. But she was an evangelist, and she was the biggest rip-off artist in the world. My aunt, I had another aunt, she died, and this lady raced to her house and cleaned the place out. because God wanted her to have all of my other aunt's stuff. Isn't that great? I know. What a hypocrite. So I have evangelists in my family. Anyway, this guy was an evangelist. His name was Ted Haggard. He was a multi-millionaire. He was the darling of the religious right. He was an advisor to President George W. Bush. And then it was discovered he preached against adultery. He hated homosexuality. Sex before marriage and abortion were both horrible as far as he was concerned. It was an abomination. You were going to go to hell if you ever aborted a fetus. You were going to go to hell if you committed adultery. All homosexuals were an abomination. They were all going to hell. And he swore this on the Bible, and he was a Bible pounder. This is the way he talked. Everyone was surprised when he was caught in a drug-fueled 13-year gay relationship that had multiple partners. So this guy was juicing up with crystal meth, going out and having sex with other guys. And the way that it was disclosed was because he had one major boyfriend, and he stopped giving him money. He stopped giving the guy money, and so he's the one that came out and said, "Hey, look, I've been having this affair with this guy for 13 years, and I procure him other men to have sex with." That was his job. He was his procurer. So he was a hypocrite. He was preaching against this stuff, but he was doing it himself. He was also a Baptist, and Baptists don't believe in drinking. And here this guy was juicing himself up with crystal meth. Can I say that? Can I say juice up? And blazing up. I heard that on a television show, wasn't it? Hypocrisy is a form of fundamental attribution error. Hypocrites judge others as worse than they are themselves, even though they perform the same or worse than people that they are condemning. Hypocrites are somewhat narcissistic and rationalize their own shortcomings and condemn those of others. So these guys are narcissistic, and what they see, it's easy. It's okay if they do it, but nobody else can do it. And it's okay if they do it because they know how wonderful they are. That's how they read themselves. So they tend to be narcissists. As much fun as that is.
You know what's interesting about all of them?
What?
Ted Haggard is still leading the church.
Is he?
He left the church when he got caught when all that came out.
Yeah.
He had to leave that church.
But
then he started a new one, and a bunch of people followed him.
Jimmy Swaggart, the same thing. Jimmy Swaggart was Jerry Lee Lewis's cousin, and Jimmy Swaggart was and he would preach against this and that and the other. And one time he got caught with 3 prostitutes in a motel room. They arrested him. This was like in Louisiana, where it's against the law to be with prostitutes, for one thing. But he's from Louisiana, of course. But he got caught with 3 prostitutes. Had to leave the church. He was a Baptist. Had to leave the church, but he started his own religion, and he's still out there to this day, Jimmy Swaggart. I know. So he started another church.
Yeah.
Well, that's perfect. Does it have anything to do with helping gay people?
No idea.
Or is he still preaching against who he was before, as interesting as that is? But you have to be kind of narcissistic to be a good preacher, don't you? Don't you? Think about all the evangelists you know. They're pretty people. They're very attractive people. I think in the next chapter we talk about how pretty they are. And they're able to get people to come to their church because they're so attractive. I mean, who wants to go to a church and the guy that's standing up there looks like an old pig or something? No, people want to go to a church where the person that's talking to them is attractive. So it draws your eyes to them so that you can hear their words. No? Preachers are supposed to be attractive. You can write that down. Preachers are supposed to be attractive. Okay. Hypocrisy induction is making people aware of their hypocrisy, causing them cognitive dissonance. And of course, if somebody said to this guy, look, you're gay and you have all this illicit sex with all these gay males, you know, why do you preach against this type of behavior? And, you know, it would cause him a great deal of cognitive dissonance, theoretically. Research by Takaku in 2006 showed that when people are made aware of their hypocritical dissonance, they go quickly from anger to forgiveness. So whereas before they have all this righteous indignation about adultery and homosexuality, they're preaching against it, all of a sudden they say this person should be forgiven. The person who is gay, the person who has aborted, all these people should be forgiven. Whereas before they were ready to send them to hell, as if they could, as if that's their job. I get to decide who gets to go to hell. My aunt got to decide who gets to go to hell. She decided I was going to hell. It's okay, don't worry about it. Ants can't send people to hell. I don't think so. I hope. Maybe they can. Write that down someplace. Dissonance theory predicts that when we dislike someone, if we do them a favor, we will like them more. Oh God, this means if you don't like somebody, you should be nice to them. If you do, then they will become your friends, and then everything will be okay. This is known as the Benjamin Franklin effect. This is what Ben Franklin did. He had an enemy. Of course, he was an author. He was a publisher. And so a lot of people didn't like what he said. So there were a lot of people that railed against Benjamin Franklin and what he believed, including his own son. Benjamin Franklin's son was the royal governor of Pennsylvania. Benjamin Franklin was a rebel. And his son was a loyalist. And so when the revolution started, Ben Franklin's son was actually the royal governor of Pennsylvania. And he had to leave the country. And he lived the rest of his life in England. And the two of them never communicated because he had different beliefs. Anyway, Ben Franklin did a favor for an enemy, and after that they became friends. And this is known as the Ben Franklin effect, doing something nice for somebody that you don't like. Try it. If anybody has any enemies, be nice to that enemy. Do something nice for them. If you see them broken down on the road, stop and try to help them. And if you do help them, they'll be your friend forever. And you will feel better about them because you helped them. How about that? Do you have any enemies? Yeah. There you go. See, be nice to them. To you. See, I see the face that you're making, and that's true. I had a long conversation. I'm in the gym, I'm lifting, I'm almost done, and this guy comes up to me and he talks to me for an hour and a half. But he was an old military man. And sometimes military people have done things that they don't like. And so sometimes they need to talk to people about it. Well, they can't talk to somebody that has never been there. It's easier for them to talk to people that have been through that stuff. That's just the way it works. So he talked to me for an hour and a half. And one of the things that we were talking about was how you dehumanize your enemies. It's really hard to shoot somebody that you know and you like. It's really hard to shoot somebody that you recognize as somebody like you. It's not difficult to kill somebody who isn't human. So this is one of the tricks that military people use. They will start referring to the enemy as they denigrate the enemy. We have to do that. It's really hard to fight somebody that is that you know and potentially could like. So what you have to do is dehumanize them. And this is what happened. This is what happened during World War I. They had to dehumanize the Germans. A lot of people in the United States were of German ancestry. So they had to dehumanize them. And they did this by calling them Huns and Krauts. This is what they did during World War I. During the Second World War, we referred to the Japanese not as sons of Nippon, but as Japs. During the Vietnam War, we didn't refer to the Vietnamese as Vietnamese. We called them initials, VC. They were VC. They were gooks. Another name I'm not going to use all the names we called them. But another name we referred to them by was zipperheads. Well, why in the world would you call somebody a zipperhead? Do you know what that had to do with?
Nothing.
If they got hit in the head and they had to have their head stitched up, it looks like they have a zipper. And there were a lot of people that had been hit in the head or something anyway. There were a lot of them. And they shaved their heads and they looked like they had these scars on their heads that looked like zippers. You know, it didn't happen all the time. It wasn't all that common. But one of the things that we had to do in Vietnam was body counts. So you go out, you know, you have a firefight, and after it was over with, if you drove them away, then you would be able, if they didn't drag their dead away, then you'd go out and you'd have a body count, just to show that you had done something. That you had won the battle, as stupid as that sounds. So they had body counts. So we'd have to go out and count the bodies. You got an arm over here, that's one. You know, it's probably the same guy, and his legs over here, that's two. You know, you killed two people because there's an arm and a leg, that kind of stuff. Does this sound horrible? I know. Yeah, it is pretty bad. So we'd have body counts. And we've always done this. We've always done this with our enemies. We try to make them look different from us. As you can see, here's a Japanese soldier. This is what the enemy looks like. He's Japanese. You can see he's got really bad eyes. He's got buck teeth. He's yellow, and he's carrying away a naked white woman. That's the enemy. He's a rapist. He's a murderer. And here we've got the same thing. You can see his claws are animal claws. Doesn't have fingernails. He has claws. And here's this attractive red-headed woman, and he's about to kill her and he's got that vicious look on his face. Propaganda posters. Okay.
Were Americans the only one who did this, or did other countries?
Oh, everybody did it.
Oh.
Sure. I mean, it's really hard to kill. It would be really hard to kill us if they liked us, you know. So we can't like our enemies, they're our enemies. And there's a reason why we're fighting them, because they're bad guys. So we did the same thing with, during the Cold War, we did the same thing with the Soviets. We made them into monsters. They were godless monsters. Godless, that was one of the things. They were commies, so they had to be godless, despite the fact that Russia has, soldiers eat babies. Who knew?
They call us Satanists.
There you go. We're Satanists because we don't believe in Allah. So we must worship the devil. You can see this is Adolf Hitler. You can see he's got a bayonet. He's ready to plunge it in your heart. He has a crazed look on his face. Propaganda posters. We have to dehumanize the enemy. It's the way you do things. I was talking to a guy. He was yesterday. He was in the Marines, and he was stationed in the Middle East. And one of the things they would capture people. That was his job. His job was going out and sneaking up on people and capturing them. He would snatch them, and he would, you know. And anytime you go out on a bombing mission, if you're in the Air Force, it's a sortie. You know, you're not killing thousands of people. You refer to it as a sortie. And if you neutralize an area, or if you kill everybody in an area, you've neutralized it. You know, we change the nomenclature that we use. We talk about dehumanizing everything. Fighting an enemy is still fighting another human with all the attributes of any other human. Often this can only be done if the enemy is dehumanized. It happens in every war and often as propaganda before combat begins. Yes, sir.
Even in Iraq, they were called low-level kinetic operations. This is a fancy way of saying we're going to go kill somebody.
Yeah, we're going to go kill everybody in that village. Okay. Yeah. We neutralize a lot of villages in Vietnam. You neutralize a village by killing it, or killing all the males. So if you kill all the males, what are you going to do with the females? Well, sometimes they're the bad guys too. If you kill the females, what are you going to do with the kids? Oh, don't think about it. Don't even think about it.
No, my dad tells me stories. So.
Well, he's right. He's right. And then, yeah, you never know. You just never know. Such prejudice makes ruthlessness and cruelty easier. This is the Japanese. The first battle of World War II was in Nanking. They marched into Nanking. The Chinese army was protecting Nanking. The Chinese army pulled out. They lost the battle. And then the Japanese went in. Some of the Chinese soldiers dressed in civilian clothes. And of course, this was the rationale that the Japanese used for a butcher session that lasted for weeks. And they chopped people's heads off. Was this guy a Chinese soldier? Well, potentially he wasn't. But of course, they killed him anyway. They did bayonet practice on civilians, women, children. They raped women. It was a bloodfest. It was the most god-awful thing you could possibly imagine. And they had a competition. The samurai sword is extremely sharp. It's a relatively thick piece of steel. They had a competition as to who could chop somebody's head off the smoothest, the easiest, the quickest. So they had competitions. The officers did. Anyway. And this is dehumanizing the enemy is one of the things that you have to do during war. Cruel behavior is dissonant. We're not fighting Iraqis. We're not fighting Afghans. We're fighting insurgents, and we're fighting terrorists.
We call them Hajis too.
Well, yeah, Haji is from an old television show that you probably Johnny Quest. His buddy was from India, actually, and his name was Haji. So, I know. Yeah, it's a really weird idea. But we dehumanize them. We're not really killing... We're not killing other human beings. We're not killing somebody's father. We're not killing somebody's brother or their father, their dad. We're killing terrorists. So we're killing insurgents. Or we're neutralizing the enemy by killing them. So we have to dehumanize the enemy. Cruel behavior is dissonant with our view of self as a decent human being. If we harm someone, this creates dissonance between what we did, inflict pain on another person, and or view of ourselves as a decent person. So it's hard to see ourselves as a good person if we do these kinds of things. If we are a bully and beat people up, it's really hard to do this. I don't know what time it is. It's 10:13, 10:15. 10:19. To resolve the dissonance, we may come to hate our victim and engage in dehumanization. And of course, this is what happens with bullies. In order for them to hurt somebody, they have to see that person as something else. Potentially what they see that person is somebody that's weak. I'm strong, they're weak, therefore I can beat them up. By convincing ourselves that our victim is less than human, we reduce the dissonance. And so this happens, this is how we do things. Next time we'll start talking about prejudice. I know I'm going way, way too slow. This is chapter 6. This is the 9th week, so I should be somewhere close to 9. But I'm on 6, and that's not close, very close.